Hi there, I'm John. I'm here to talk to you about reverse engineering your ski goggles for fun and profit, an exercise which so far has involved a net loss and very little fun. So, who the hell is this moonbat? Well, I'm John. I ski. I am well known for breaking things before they break me, usually when it comes to software and hardware reverse engineering. I am a professional pyrotechnician and a semi-professional bunny dad. Bun for tax. So, now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, who are Recon Instruments? Well, Recon Instruments were a Vancouver-based software company headquartered in this building, founded with the original intention of making smart swimming goggles. When that venture turned out to be harder and less lucrative than they anticipated, they pivoted to other forms of smart eyewear, actually beating Google Glass to the market by almost a full year. They then released, among other things, after the ski goggles, they then released cycling glasses in the form of Jet, which I would make the argument actually makes you look even less cool than Google Glass somehow. And the piece of hardware that we're mostly going to be discussing today, the Snow 2 Smart Ski Goggles. And these puppies were everywhere. They got stocked in Apple stores. They had official integrations with GoPro, Oakley, Smith Optics. At the time, a lot of people in the snow sports corner of things were really going nuts about these. Like they were a real hot ticket item for a while. And they are powered by this little box, the actual Snow 2. See, Recon had the real smart idea that if they were busy making the hardware, they could just get existing ski goggle manufacturers to make the goggles and then build this standard whereby the goggle manufacturers would just build a cutout into the goggles to slot the unit and battery in. So you could either buy the goggles off the shelf or pre-fit it into a pair of goggles that supported them, and off you go. Little bit like this. So this is generally what the kind of UI looks like. You have a little view essentially in the bottom right corner of your peripheral vision, and otherwise it's pretty much unobstructed. So big news, they do so well that they get acquired by Intel. They start to scale up production, release things like the Jet that we talked about earlier, and even announce partnerships to bring the Jet into enterprise use for things like repair manual access or improved stock picking. And then, almost exactly 2 years later, the bad news hits. It's at this point that the story kind of goes dark. Intel completely shutters not only Recon, but their entire wearables division, announces that they're discontinuing support for not only the hardware, but the software platforms that backed a lot of the functionality, and basically never talks about it again. So I always, having wanted one of these things, see that everything has kind of gone sideways for them and go, hey, these must be cheap and easy to acquire now. I'll just buy one and fix it up. How hard can it be? I would now, in hindsight, put that on my very rapidly increasing list of famous last words, because it turns out the answer to that question is really hard. So I start my search. I set up eBay search notifications for these terms that these things tend to show up under. I scour Reddit and Twitter looking for anyone who has ever mentioned owning one in the hope that they will sell it to me. And I trawl the internet with looking to find people who are willing to sell them. And after a long while of not being able to find anything, I start to get hits. I managed to track down the rarest of the rare, this modular Snow 2 on Kijiji in Canada, and convince the poor guy selling it that an extra $100 plus shipping is worth it to override collection only. I found someone selling a job lot of 5 broken units, which I picked up with the expectation that at some point I'd be able to fix them. I managed to track down a journalist on Twitter who was kind enough to send me his early review Jet for a small fee plus shipping. And I managed to find a few variants of the Snow 2 that surfaced on eBay, and I was able to snap them up. I also have the Snow 2s owned by a very well-known technology executive who I ended up in conversation with primarily because I cold DM'd him on Twitter after seeing a tweet he'd made 4 years ago about having them and did not know at the time who he was, and then proceeded to, I'll say, Google his name and go, oh, okay, that's novel. So somehow, through a series of blind luck and overpaying Canadians, I have managed to get myself a whole bunch of examples of this hardware, including some prototype and early release versions. So what now? Well, if you're anything like me, you have desensitized yourself to the cold, emotionally draining experience of cold messaging random strangers on the internet about ski goggles. So you do the same thing again, except with former employees. And I find one person who can't really say much because of NDAs and all that jazz, but gives me just enough information in terms of pointers of how things roughly should work to be able to start poking at the firmware sitting under the hood with these. So let's quickly run through obsolete firmware 101, or how to completely break your one-of-a-kind hardware pet project. So it turns out hardware is hard, and most hardware engineers like to be lazy. So you do a bit of digging, and after a while, you realize quite quickly that the main chipsets that all of these things use are based off of a reference implementation by Texas Instruments, specifically the Texas Instruments OMAP 3 board. And the O there stands for open, which helps us a ton, because it turns out when you base your entire family of stuff off of a really well-known standard for hardware, you can find examples of the kernel and bootloader for it. Thank you, shared hardware platforms. So we now have a method to run, it's essentially kickstart code running on these things. So how do we actually get to that point? Well, these boards are running Android, but like proper old dingy Android from back in the day. So we want to figure out how to update that to nice, fancy, shiny new Android with which we can do strange and deviant things like run Kotlin and cry. So the next step, we grab the Android applications and tear them down. And if you dig far enough into that, what you discover is the update server URLs and the update packages, and precisely how to build a firmware update package, which then allows you to essentially use the existing bootloader implementation and a little bit of trickery to boot your own operating system on it, providing that it can run within that specific chip. Now, this is slightly complicated by the fact that, one, the update system is unable to update itself due to not having an update server anymore, and two, the fact that I discovered very quickly that when you factory reset them, it sets it back to an even older version of Android than the ancient sarcophagus build that most of them shipped with, which means that you end up in this great situation where, after swearing into a mirror to restore morale a little, you figure out how to build an update package that can reset your factory reset, which you can only do by reverse engineering the unupdatable updater. So, after a year or so of my sanity quickly going down the drain and a lot of staring at decompiled Java, did this work? Yes, it did. So, this all comes full circle now to the project that my shenaniganery here has become, which is OpenRecon. OpenRecon is an open source project. We're still in the very early days of this, especially because very few people actually have this hardware and can test it. But the goal with this that we're working towards is to build fully open source firmware, applications, bootloader code, and other infrastructure so that we can take these devices and make them amazing again. Because I still have a fundamental belief that these things are awesome, and like, frankly, trying to get a heads-up display anywhere near the cost of these things is near impossible. I'm reliably informed they kind of have a habit of really blowing people's minds when you use them, so I'm kind of sad we're not doing Bang Bang Con in person this year, because if we were, then I could have let you all try one on and have your mind blown for real. However, thank you very much for listening to my talk. If you want to find out more about any of the heavy technical detail in relation to this project or what I'm doing with Open Recon or outside of that, you can find me on Twitter here or on the Discord channel for this talk. Thank you very much. Stay safe and stay happy.